Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. We are on part three of the Identity Operations Lab series, and this is where things are going to start to get interesting because up until this point, our app has only really been able to watch what we're doing. It can read the data, track changes, and tell us what happened, but it's not actually doing anything with all of the information we've collected. Today, that's going to change because we are going to modify our application so that it can start using the data it collects to make access decisions on its own. In other words, we're shifting from watching to acting. But before we do that, we need to quickly review where part two left off so that we can kind of talk about all of the steps we did before to make this make sense. So let's go for that. Now, in part two, we taught the app the basics of identity lifecycle management, or as the IAM world calls it, joiners, movers, and leavers. Joiners are new hires, movers are people changing teams or roles, and leavers are basically anyone trying to exit the company. Now, spotting those three events is exactly what part two was all about, but recognition is only half the job in this case because real IAM systems have to act on what they know. That is what this part three is going to be about. Because today we are going to basically break down every lifecycle event the app learned to recognize in part two and automate it so that it will trigger a real change in access in part three. So, what does that actually look like in practice? Well, it comes down to one really simple principle. So let's talk about that. Now, the simple principle we're talking about is that access follows the person, okay? If someone is in sales, they get sales tools. If they move to HR, the sales tools go away and the HR tools come in. If they leave the company, everything goes away at once with no exceptions. On the surface, that idea sounds pretty obvious, right? But actually doing it well takes really good automation skills because the system has to be able to handle those changes on its own in the moment they happen, no matter how many people are prompting. Now, the reason this all matters, big picture, is pretty simple. The more access a person has beyond what their job actually requires, the more risk the company carries if an account is ever compromised or used in the wrong way. Tying access directly to roles basically keeps that risk contained, and it also makes the whole system easier to audit because every permission not only has a clear reasoning behind it, but it has log evidence. That is exactly what this whole lab is about. And with that in mind, let's kind of look at what we added to the application in this new lab kit under the hood and talk a little bit about it. Let's get it. Now, seven new pieces got added this round, and together they are what turn the app from something that just tracks identity changes into something that can actually manage access. The policy rules are what tell the app which access belongs to which role. The new table data tables give us a way to remember what access groups exist, who currently has them, and when those assignments changed. From there, the provisioning logic steps in to grant access when someone needs it, while the deprovisioning logic removes access when it no longer belongs. On top of that, the users got a upgrade when it came to their user page. So now you can kind of see a person and their access side by side instead of having to go to a separate part of the page to see that. Now, with all of those pieces together, what you end up with is a small working version of what the industry calls an IGA platform, which is just short for Identity Governance and Administration. Real IGA tools like SailPoint and Okta do this across huge environments with hundreds of applications, but the core idea is basically the same as what you're about to run on your laptop right now. The reason this all works as well as it does is just because one of those pieces is tied together by one simple pattern that repeats every time the app processes a file. So let's talk about that. The pattern that we mentioned is comparison itself. The app keeps two lists for each person. One is what they should have based on the rules, and the other is what they actually have based on what's in the database. Every time a new HR file comes in, the app puts those lists side by side and then looks for the differences. If something is missing from the actual list, it gets added. If something is sitting in the actual list that should not be there, it gets removed. The industry name for this process is called reconciliation, and it's the heartbeat of every provisioning system, no matter how big or how small. The lab does this on a roster of a few people. Okay. Real platforms do this across hundreds of applications and millions of users. The mechanics are exactly the same. Compare the list, add what's missing, remove what's not there. That's provisioning, of course, but the comparison only works if you have the rules to build the first list from in the first place. So let's talk about rules in this lab. Here are the rules in lab. Kept simple on purpose, I promise. Sales gets the customer tools, HR gets the people tools, IT gets the admin and ticketing tools, finance gets the money tools. Anyone marked as terminated basically gets nothing at all. Notice that none of these rules mention a specific person, they only mention specific departments. That is the whole idea behind a concept we like to call rules based access control, or RBAC for short, and it is one of the foundations of modern identity work. Basically, instead of handing permissions to people one at a time, you hand them to roles and then you link the people to those roles. So when someone changes roles, the access can automatically change with them because the link is what carries the permissions, not the person. That is what makes this approach scale to be so large and so efficient for enterprise systems, because a real company has way more roles than five departments with all sorts of things like nested roles inside other roles, fine grained entitlements, approved workflows, and conditional rules layered on top. But the foundation underneath of all of that is exactly what you're looking at right now. Same principles, same engine, just way more pieces. We are keeping it simple here in this case because if you can't understand the baseline reasons behind why the app did what it did, you're not going to learn the larger lesson here. So, for the app to actually use these rules and remember what it's done, it needs somewhere to store everything, right? That is where this new database table is going to come in, or tables, because there's two of them. So let's talk about that. Now, two new tables, and that is the whole storage upgrade. Okay. The first table lists every access group the system knows about, like sales tools or HR tools. And the second table keeps track of which person currently has which groups. So if you wanted to ask the database who has finance access right now, the second table is where that answer lives. What makes these tables genuinely useful, though, is the timestamp on every row. Every time the app assigns a group or pulls one back, it stamps the moment it happened, which means the database is not just a snapshot of right now, it is also a record of how things got to be the way that they are. That matters because in the real world, access has to be explainable. 6 months from now, somebody might ask why a particular person ever had a particular permission, and the system needs to be able to show its work. The industry name for this is access governance, and it is a huge part of what auditors actually check. They're not just looking at who has what, they're looking at how it got that way and whether the trail makes sense. So, now that the lab gives you both pieces, the current state and the history that explains it, we should probably take a look at where our logic actually lives and explain a little bit about that. Let's get into it. All of our logic lives in one main file, which is already written for you. When you look at it, you will see sections that define rules, build the list of required access, check current access, compare, assign, remove, and save and log. Okay. Each part is separated for clarity. This matches real system design where policy, comparison, and action are kept apart. This structure makes the system easier to test, predict, and expand. So as you read the file, just pay attention not to what it does, but also to how it's organized, because that part is the main lesson, all right? So enough of theory for now. Let's talk about actually getting this running on your machine. Now that our theory is over, time to build, right? First thing you need is the lab kit itself, and that link is going to be in the presentation in the description below. If you go to the very last slide, there's going to be a hyperlink there that says, please download this for the lab kit. You'll just click on that and do it. Once you do that and it's finished, unzip it and you will have the project folder ready to go. Now, there is a choice when you get here. If you've already built part 2 from the previous video, you can drag all the new files into your part 2 folder and just let them overwrite the existing ones when prompted. If you're new, you can just copy over the entire folder because, it'll basically be a fresh setup. Like I designed it so that no matter where you come in on this project, you can just pick up and start with the videos. The only thing that you're missing by not going to the previous videos is just context. So if you're already pretty familiar with the concepts up to this point, then you can just be comfortable picking this up from this point and moving forward with it. Now, getting out of all of that extra talking, um, basically just use the new folder by itself. The part 3 kit is fully self-contained, so you don't need part 2 for it to run. Once your folder is ready, open it in the code editor. I use Virtual Studio codes. If you want to use something different, you can, but I just use that because it's free. But any editor will let you open a folder, will work. And VS Code, once you're in there, just go to File, then go to Open Folder, and then select the folder you just unzipped. Once the project loads, you're going to just get ready and start to install the app. Let's talk about that. All right, getting the app started basically takes two commands, but before you run them, let's make sure you can actually see the terminal. With your editor open and your folder loaded, you do not need to open any code files yet. You're going straight to the terminal. In Visual Studio Code, you're going to go to the top of the window, select View, and then select Choose Terminal. A panel will open at the bottom of your screen. That is your terminal. It might look intimidating if you've never used one before, but now you only need to do two things in it. The first command, shown on the screen, basically installs everything that the app needs to run. It's actually talking about the second one. The first one is to get you to that folder if you don't already automatically go into it through VS Code. But if you just need to open terminal and navigate, you just use that code, paste your project path folder, it'll take you there. You run the second code for the requirements, and then let's continue to the second thing. Now, you'll see a wall of text scroll by while your computer installs everything, completely normal. Just wait until it stops, and you'll see a fresh blinking cursor on a new line. Once that happens, type in that third command that you see and press enter. That starts the app itself. After a moment, the terminal will print a local web address. Copy that address, paste it into your browser, and press enter. That's going to open up your dashboard, and then the app is basically running locally on your own computer, so nothing is exposed to the internet. Once the dashboard is open in your browser, you are ready for your first demo, so let's get into that. So, time for our fun part here, right? With your dashboard open in the browser, click Upload in the top navigation bar. On the Upload page, click Choose File, then go into the LabKit folder. What you're going to do is do Open Data, then Simple HR Files, and then click HR Before. Once that file is selected, click Process, okay? After a moment, you should kind of see a success message telling you that the file was processed. Then you're going to click the Users in the top navigation bar. What you should be looking at now is the starting team for our demo company. Already loaded into the system, you should see Jordan in sales, Chris and Alex in IT, Sam in finance, and the leadership team above them. More importantly, each person should already have the right access for the team that they're on. And IAM, that kind of automatic default access, is called birthright access. It simply means that the permissions someone gets is automatically because of who they are and what team they belong to. They did not have to request anything, the rules assigned it for them. That is our baseline, so now let's see what happens when the team actually changes and upload our second file. Now, the team is about to change and you are going to watch it happen live. Click Upload again, choose HR After from the same sample HR files folder, and then you'll click Process again. What you'll do is go back to that users page, look closely, because this is where you're going to see your changes. Maya is going to appear as a brand new sales hire and get sales access automatically. That's going to be your joiner. Jordan is going to move from sales to HR so that the sales access is removed and the HR access takes its place. That is your mover. Chris is now going to be fired, and then all of his access is going to get pulled at once, and that is going to be your lever. And Sam stays exactly the same, which is really a good thing because it lets us know for our baseline that the app is correctly knowing when to not touch something. So it's a good thing to look at that kind of stuff just so that you know nothing funky is going on. Now, in one run, you basically just watched a full joiner, mover, lever workflow play out from start to finish. That is the whole point of this lab, right? It is the same kind of thing real IAM systems do every day, but at a much smaller scale. So let's break down how the app actually pulled all of that off, and we'll talk about it. Now, behind the scenes, the app follows the same 9 steps every time you upload a file. It reads the file, it matches the people by employee ID, it checks what each person should have based on the rules, and then it checks that they actually have it in the database. Once it compares the two lists, it can add anything that's missing and remove anything that shouldn't be there. Once those two things occur, it'll save the state and then write everything that was changed down in the log so that you have a record of what happened. This sequence is at the heart of every provisioning system that you will find, whether it's a small lab like this or a big enterprise tool. The core concepts about all of this are the same: read, compare, reconcile, log. Remember this pattern, okay? Because once you see it here, you will notice it everywhere. Now, let's actually verify that the app did what it was supposed to, person by person. Now, verifying it is actually pretty satisfying. Maya joins, gets sales. Jordan swaps over to HR. Chris loses everything, including his wife and kids. Oh, God, awful. Sam stays put with finance. Alex stays with IT. The reason this matters so much is that every demo, every test case, every audit comes down to predicting the outcome before it happens. If your numbers do not match what is on the screen, you know something went wrong somewhere. And because we built the app with logging baked in, you can actually trace back where things might have went wrong. That is the kind of predictability of what separates a real system from just some simple script. A simple script just runs and hopes. A real system runs, records what it did, and then let you verify the whole thing afterward. And the place where you can see all of that verification at a glance is the user's page itself. So if you want to navigate back to that, you can go and look at it. So let's get into this next slide and kind of talk about some other things. Now, the users page, as I mentioned before, is where this lesson for all of this kind of comes together. If you have not looked at it since the second upload, head back to it now, take a second to read it and you know what it's actually showing you. Each row is going to be one person. You can see who they are, whether they're active or terminated, and what access they have right now. That matters because this is the real skill that you are learning here. How to look at identity and access together and decide whether the system is behaving the way it should. And that matters far beyond this lab because every real platform is going to have a different UI, but the process is going to stay the same. So if you can look at the person, their status, their role, and their access, and answer any array of questions, that means that you will now have this IAM mindset. And it's something that security teams and regular administration teams use every single day. Now, ultimately to say the goal of this was not just to learn this specific interface because this is like every single one of them is different. It's just to learn the underneath concepts and the baseline coding principles behind everything so that no matter what platform you're dropped into in the work world, you know what to look for and how to ask questions well enough to navigate around. And if we want to talk about how all this is wired together, the answer is really in the code itself. So let's talk about that. Now, the code is your real teacher here, okay? And do not try to memorize it. It's impossible. You won't be able to succeed. Just follow the comments inside the file. They'll show you where the rules are, where the comparisons happen, and where the results are saved in the database. Now, I write this code specifically with a lot of comments because to me, reading the comments and kind of piecing everything together is much faster than just studying and memorizing it. Because when you're first learning, your job is to follow the flow, not to write everything from scratch. So once you can follow the flow, you can start making changes, adding your own rules, maybe even adding some departments and some access groups. That is really how you start learning this. You read it, you change it, you break it, you fix it, you learn it in that order, if I'm being so for real. So before we back up, let's just pull back and look at the big lessons from this whole round and talk about the project overall, because we still have one more part going into this, and I'll kind of talk about that at the end. Let's go ahead. Now, 5 lessons to take with you, all right? Put these in your little brain hole. First, identity changes should drive access changes. They are not separate processes, they are connected. 2, access should follow your written rules, not someone's memory. People forget, systems don't. 3, granting access is only half the job. Removing access is just as important, and often where companies fail, okay? 4th, good IAM does both automatically on every change. 5, every business role should link back to a real technical permission. The role explains why, and the permission explains how. When these stay connected, your system works well. When they drift apart, you get problems. The main job of an identity team is to keep those concepts constantly in balance with each other. So take a second and let those 5 things sink in. Perfect. Okay, now let's talk about what your app can do and where we can go from here. Now, your app can hand out access on its own and it can swap when somebody moves teams and it can pull back when somebody leaves. That is real working provisioning. Now, to be clear, real production systems have way more on top of this. Like I said before, tons of different types of workflows, access, emergency procedures, integrations, all of that. But the foundation, the actual brain of how this lab makes decisions is exactly basically what you just built. Now, in part four, we're basically going to look for things that should not be there, like leftover access or permissions that no one can explain, and kind of creating a sort of automation to deal with these things that actually people don't really have yet. And once we do that, we can kind of show people, hey, there are ways to get around this, and you can look good when it comes to jobs and stuff, I guess. So I did it for myself, and people really liked my ideas. So I'm kind of sharing this with you all so you can kind of put this under your belt and use it for those interviews. Now, this whole group's problem that I was kind of getting onto about before is called access certification, or sometimes called access review. And it's basically what auditors look for in every compliance report. So hopefully you'll keep following along, because this is where things are going to start getting really interesting. And I'm going to kind of talk more about governance and all of that stuff, and where most security teams spend their time. So before you go, here is everything that you're going to need to keep building in this last slide. As I said before, everything you need is here on the screen. The Python docs, the database docs, the Flask docs, which is the framework that we're using under the hood, and the lab kit itself, as I mentioned before. So tap whichever one fits where you're at now and go build, because once you start getting used to all this and you can kind of play around with Flask and get more involved with their platform, you can get into doing some really cool stuff. So hopefully you guys will have some good things to say about this video, and I really hope that if you're interested or you want me to do more stuff, or you aren't familiar with me or any of these concepts, DM me, ask questions, do anything that you can to get your hands on technology, because this is going to start becoming less of a, oh, it's only the techies problem, and it's going to start becoming an everyday person's problem. So the more people pay attention and the more people kind of follow along, the better decisions we can make, not just in IT, but in general business as a whole. So all of that to go to say, I hope you guys have a great day. See ya.